In the year 1153, Henry II, future King of England, executed 60 archers after the siege of Cromarsh by having them beheaded before the army as a show of his disdain for the men they were. They were crossbowmen and archers, a weapon at the time that was seen as a cowardly weapon or a weapon of the low class, either the mercenary or someone not in feudal society. The bow was not the feudal weapon of chivalry. However, how did the Normans, like Robert Guiscard and Rod of Sicily, feel towards the weapon? If that sounds interesting, let's jump into it because that's what we're going to discuss today. Although not as appreciated until the much later 13th century and so on, such as the Battle of Falkirk, where Edward I used the Welsh longbow to his advantage, and later on the battles in France, such as Crécy and Agincourt, the bow was a weapon that the Normans saw good use for and exploited, such as at the Battle of Dyrrhachium in 1081, where the Normans fielded archers against their enemies, and of course, William the Conqueror famously used them at the Battle of Hastings. Now, the purpose of the bowmen in the in the Norman world varied. There were two different types of bowmen we would use. You could use a bowman on the battlefield, or you could use a bowman for a siege. Now, during a siege, the Normans not only fielded the crossbow and the longbow, which we stated before, later in feudal society, from the Norman descendants such as Henry II, and so on, it was seen as either a low-class weapon or a cowardly weapon. It was not a heroic weapon of feudal society. It was looked at as, a weapon that was beneath you. However, during this era with the Normans, it was appreciated. They not only used that, but they also used a much larger ballista, similar to the one that Alexander the Great used in the classical era, but that's a video for another day. Now, on the field of battle, the Normans would have a limited amount of arrows they would be using if they were fighting on the offense. The man would carry his quiver full of arrows or bolts that he would take to the battlefield. During a siege, they would have oxen pull up carts of bolts and carts of arrows for the men to use so they could continuously pelt the enemy. Now, the purpose of the archer would be to either harass the enemy while you're setting up camp, or while your camp is set up, any pathways leading to it. William Rufus and Robert Guiscard both would place crossbowmen and archers at certain places at the camp where they felt they could harass an enemy if he was approaching them to attack them. They would also look for weaknesses within the enemy. It was not the weapon that was going to win the day or win the battle by itself, but rather it could force an enemy to maneuver to a weaker position by showering him with arrows, or you could defend against oncoming cavalry by using arrows. Remember, the Normans fought against the Pechenegs, the Byzantines, and the Turks, all of whom fielded different types of horse archers and lightly armored cavalry. And a lot of times the horse is unarmored, so the horse is exposed to your crossbow bolt fire or to your longbow fire, therefore rendering him ineffective or useless. If you kill the horse, well, now he's no longer cavalry, he's now a footman, and you could deal with him in a different way. So that was the way that they would be used on the field of battle, to expose gaps in the enemy's weaknesses or capitalize on a gap the enemy exposed themselves. During a battle in 1124, the enemy, as they were attacking them, had packed themselves so tightly they left their left side unshielded, so they used mounted archers. Yes, the Normans used mounted archers to move to the left side of the enemy and fire upon them unshielded. Now, there is a debate as to whether or not these mounted archers would remain on top of their horses when they did it. A lot of people believe they would ride to position because the advantage of the speed with the horse. They would then dismount, fire at the enemy, remount, and reposition themselves. So, yes, the Normans did use archers, and yes, the Normans did use mounted archers of their own type. They also hired mercenaries from the Turks, from the Pechenegs, to use them on the battlefield. The Normans did not only use themselves to fight, specifically, they would pay others to fight for them, just as they were paid when they first arrived in Sicily as well. So it's a different type of appreciation towards the bow in this era, and that's why I think the Normans would have a good advantage against the Mongols as opposed to some of the people who fought later than they were. Oftentimes the later army is not always the better army. Sometimes your old school tactics or your old school thinking works to your advantage. And I think the practicality towards the practical approach to combat the Normans were taking was very advantageous for them. It's obvious that the bow and the crossbow and the longbow are both lethal weapons, as the French and the Scots found out the hard way. So there you have it. The Normans not only appreciated the weapon, but they used mounted archers, they used foot archers, they used crossbowmen, and they also use it during sieges. And like I said before, they also used the ballista, which also we're going to dive into in another video, because a lot of people think that certain siege equipment wasn't used during this period, or that it was forgotten after the Roman world and the Greek world's collapse, but no, it was still appreciated and it was still fielded. So stay tuned and see you guys next time.